economics for the week. We are in chapter 6, section 3, which is about monopolies. So we've been talking about the 4 main market structures, how competition is important, and what happens when competition is not allowed in a country, and different economic concepts like that. So last time we had economics, which actually was 2 weeks ago, right? We were talking about perfect competition. So remember, or learn, because really we haven't seen it a lot, but you need to understand that there's 4 main market structures. There's perfect competition, there's monopolies, oligopolies, and monopolistic competition, okay? So we've gone over perfect competition. We're going to review that right now. And now today I'm going to introduce to you a monopoly, which is literally the exact opposite of perfect competition. Then the next one we're going to look at next week will be monopolistic competition, and then we'll finish with the oligopolies. Okay? So let's get into it. Okay, we're first going to start out with some review. So think about 2 weeks ago, if you can. You guys aren't that old, so you shouldn't have lost your memory yet. Think about what we talked about. What would happen if there were no competition inside an economy? And then think about what you remember about perfect competition. Not perfect like it's the best way to go, but perfect as in it's so pure competition that basically it's so pure that nobody can win. That's how good this competition is. Okay, so think about what you remember, or take a few seconds and look at your notes from last time. Because remember, it doesn't make any sense that we're going to be learning these concepts once a week if you're not retaining kind of like how the economy works, right? You don't have to remember every single word or every single example or anything like that, but we should be retaining information that we're learning about the economy. Okay, so here you go. If there were no competition, remember what we talked about last week, no markets would exist for the exchange for goods. We would just have to accept what was given to us. There would not be a market. It would just be one thing providing to us, one business, one industry providing to us everything that we supposedly need and whatever price they want to do it at, right? Out of the competition among suppliers and consumers emerges the market's equilibrium price for every good. So what does that mean? There wouldn't be good prices because it would just be based on what the one provider or the one supplier would want to charge. Okay, so without competition, you have no choices, basically is what it's saying for the market. Without competition, you have no guarantee of good prices. And remember we talked about this before, you have no guarantee of good quality either, because if there's no competition, one company doesn't have to be better than another company. So basically we have to accept whatever quality is given. And you can actually see that here on the island a lot, right? Because not that we have no competition or no choices, but a lot of times if you need something quickly, you have to get it from here on the island, not from the mainland, not from the States, and there aren't a lot of choices. So what happens to the quality? You have to accept a lower quality if you need, like let's say you need a pot for your house, a pot, a pan, something for the kitchen. You basically have to accept whatever's here unless you're willing to wait for a long time. So there you can see what happens when there's not a lot of competition. And then it says, just what I was talking about here, but this is a good visual thing to keep it in your mind, the 4 types of market models: perfect competition, monopolies, monopolistic competition, and oligopolies. Okay, so that gives you an overview of what we're going to be studying and how important it is to know the pros and cons of competition and how not every economy works like the economies that we are used to. Remember, the economy of the United States, the economy of Honduras, they're free market economies, supposedly, right? But we take it as completely normal, correct? We think it's completely normal that this is the way our economies work. But remember, that's the Western culture that we live in, okay? The Western hemisphere has a Western culture, and part of the Western culture is that it's a free market economy. There's differences in how they run their free market economies, but for the most part, that's the culture here. Of course, with some exceptions like in Venezuela and Cuba. But over in the eastern side of the world, remember, places like Russia and different countries like that resent that we give so much freedom to our people. So, don't always think that the economy that you know is what is all around the world, because there's plenty of different variations. Let's look again on the characteristics, the qualities of a perfect competition that we looked at last time, to remember what it is. Remember, we talked about it like in farming. A lot of times farming is a great example used for perfect competition, because when you buy vegetables or grain or cotton or whatever it is from a farm, obviously you're not buying the cotton, but clothes manufacturers will, then you don't care if it came from Billy's farm or if it came from Bonnie's farm, because basically the product is going to be the exact same, right? So that means that Billy's farm and Bonnie's farm are not going to be really competing on prices or on quality or on how beautiful they make their product, or if they put a bow on it or they differentiate it from the other farm down the street. Because basically they're going to look at the market and say, what are people willing to pay for my grain or my crop or my cotton or anything like that, and they have to take that price and they have to work with it. Okay, that's perfect competition. Remember, this is number one. There must be a large number of independent sellers within an industry for whose goods exists a vast demand. Okay, so that means huge number of sellers and huge demand, like food, like crops, like grain, okay? And there has to be a large number. If there's not a large number, then that creates competition, okay? If there's not a large number of people that can provide this, then it creates competition, and it's not perfect competition anymore. It's going to be one of the other ones that we're going to talk about, okay? And if there is like if there's only one person doing it, that's going to become a monopoly. So it has to have a large number of sellers. Number two, there has to be a large number of independent buyers, okay? So you need large number of sellers, large number of buyers. Number three, the industry, this is where it becomes different from monopoly or any other ones. The industry must be one in which all firms produce a standardized product, okay? Like I said, a standardized product. When there is virtually no difference among the goods available for sale. Consumers make their choices based solely on price and not any product differentiation, okay? So look, this is what I'm talking about. If you go into Eldon's and you need shampoo, about how many different shampoos are you going to find in Eldon's? Like 1 million different shampoos, okay? Do they all work the same way? Nope. Are they all the same quality? Nope. That is product differentiation. That means shampoo is never going to be in the perfect competition, because you're going to choose the shampoo that you like based on a lot of different things. Based on how it works in your hair, how it smells, what the bottle looks like, and what the price is, right? So that is not perfect competition. Perfect competition, like I said before, is like if let's say you're a restaurant and you need 1 million carrots to operate your business a day. You don't care where those carrots come from, as long as those carrots are the price that you want the carrots to be at, and that you're not paying more than the restaurant down the street for your carrots, right? Okay? You don't care what farm they come from. You don't care if they put them in a happy box. You don't care if their carrots look cleaner or anything like that. You just care that you get your carrots and that they are carrots, right? So that's going to be perfect competition. Sally's farm that sells the carrots is not going to make their carrots 50 more cents than Susie's farm, because then Sally isn't going to sell her carrots because nobody cares that they're Sally's carrots. They care about the price, okay? That's perfect competition. Perfect competition, firms must have free access to the market. That means that people can come in, people can go out anytime that they want to. So if Susie and Sally are selling those carrots, but then Sammy comes along and also wants to sell carrots, he can. And he can jump right into the market. There's no obstacles there. You might need permits or you might need some permission, but it's going to be granted freely. It's just that you need to go through some paperwork as a process of registration, a process of taxes, or anything like that. But there's nobody in the government that's going to say, like, nope, we already have enough people selling carrots and we don't need you. And you're not allowed to. No, there's not going to be any obstacles like that, like there will be sometimes in a monopoly. Okay, or in a dictatorship country, or something like that. Look at number 5. Relevant market information must be made available to all firms and buyers. Everyone in the market knows what prices firms are charging and what prices consumers are paying. Okay, that means that all the information is available. Okay, it's not like Venezuela, or it's not like a monopolies where they don't need to tell you about what they're doing with their money, about what they're charging, about how much it actually costs to produce the item or anything like that, okay? Here, all the information is available so that consumers can ensure that they are getting the price that is appropriate, or the sellers, the producers can ensure that they are selling their item at the market price. And that because if they didn't have that information, then what if they're accidentally selling too high? And then nobody's going to buy their product because they're the only ones selling too high because the information wasn't available to them. So no, it's a fair market. It's a pure competition market. Remember what they're called a lot of times. I don't know if I have this on the next slide. They're called price takers. That means that they don't create the price. The market creates the price on this one, okay? And they just have to take it and accept it. Before, but don't take notes on the parts that are just review. But I can imagine that you guys already knew that, but if you had do this in your mind, there you go. In a perfect competition, just like I just told you, no individual seller or buyer has enough influence to noticeably affect the equilibrium price of the goods traded there. Okay, so you don't have influence if you're in perfect competition. You're not going to be on top. You're just going to be one of the sellers. And look, it's not a bad thing. Okay, it's not a bad thing that you can't be on top, because basically there's stability there, right? You don't have to be fighting your way to the top. As long as you're able to produce and there is a demand, then you're guaranteed an income, okay? The instability in a place like this, especially in like the farming industry, is whether the weather is bad that year and then you don't have a supply to enter into the market, okay? That's when it can get rough. So there's stability and instability in getting into the industry of perfect competition. And then, like I said, and each firm in the market is known as a price taker because it has no real control over the price it receives for its products. It takes whatever price it can get, okay? So the other part of the instability there is, what if the market price goes way down? What if people are not willing to pay the price that you need? Now the next slide is going to show you then what happens. Let's say what happens if you're producing and it costs you more to produce than the market is willing to pay for your product. What can you do? Let's look at it. Basically, the answer to that is very limited on what can you do if your production costs or your profit is too small. Okay, your production costs are too high or your profit is too small. This is in a perfectly competitive market. The only way a firm can make an additional money is to increase its total production or decrease its cost of doing business. So you're either going to have to find ways to be more efficient in production, or how to do it with less employees so that you don't have to pay as many people to do it, or you can increase your production. But that's basically the only two options that you have to affect your profit. Okay, so now we can get into what a monopoly is. Think about it. I don't know if any of you guys have played the board game Monopoly before, but before we go into it, what do you already know about a monopoly? What do you think that means? Think about it. Think about it. Here comes the next slide. Okay, here is the game Monopoly. You have one person that is sad and hates the game that day because they have nothing in money, and then you have the one person that's basically just killing everybody on the board because they bought everything, okay? And so you have that money right there. But basically the game is honestly like what the bad and negative side of a monopoly can do. Remember the purpose of the game, if you've ever played or if you know about it, is this. You go around the board and you buy properties. As soon as you have all the properties in that community, which can either be 2 properties or 3 properties, then you have the permission and the ability to put houses on those properties. After you put houses, then you have permission to put hotels on those properties. So when somebody lands on your property, whether you have houses or hotels or nothing on there, the more you own, if you create a monopoly, then you basically kill people when they go to your property because they owe you hundreds and hundreds of dollars in rent for staying at your property. Because what is the object of the game? The object of the game is to show you basically, right, that if you create a monopoly, so you go into a neighborhood and there's only one person that owns all of the places to stay in that area, then they can put their prices very high and you have to pay them. You have no other choice. And then that person gets very, very rich and you basically become very, very poor, okay, because they created a monopoly. So that's the purpose of the game, and that's what a monopoly is. So it says right here, it's a situation that arises when a single firm, that means a single business, is the only supplier of a good for which no substitute exists. So it's called a form of imperfect competition because there is no competition at all. Okay, so let's talk about the most famous, company on Roatan. Eldon's. Does Eldon's have competition? Yes, it does. So Eldon's is not a monopoly. What is its competition? All the other supermercados. So imagine what would happen if there was only one supermercado on the island. Then they would have a monopoly, and what would happen? We would only be able to buy the food that they have, and we would only be able to pay the price that they offer, right? So what does the monopoly do? It sucks out the options, and it raises the prices, and sometimes can lower the quality because there's no competition, okay? So it's called an imperfect competition because there is no competition at all. Is there any time where a monopoly is a good thing? Doesn't sound like it, right? But you're going to find out that sometimes, if it's handled correctly, a monopoly can be a good thing in certain sectors, and that's it. Now, in things like groceries, no, it's a horrible thing to have a monopoly. But think about it. There are communist countries that run like that. There's only one government issued this, government issued that, and that's what you have to pay, and that's what you have to buy if you want to eat or you want to get clothes or whatever it is. Okay, so mostly monopolies are a negative thing, but you can see it turned into a positive thing in certain aspects. However, now let's talk about this. We say all the time that a free market is where the people create the market and the government basically stays out of it, right? Now, monopolies, the good monopolies, you're going to find out this is where it's good to have some government regulation. Okay, it is good to have some government regulation. When the government is involved a little bit, it protects the consumer. And I'll talk about that in a few of the slides. Okay, so let's talk about what makes a monopoly then. One, a company must be the sole, that means only, supplier of the good or service. I'm not talking about it's one of a couple. No, it has to be the only one. Okay, as soon as there is even one other business providing what that business provides, then it is not a monopoly. Okay, a monopoly is a company, it must be the only supplier of the good or service. Obviously, which one are we going to use on the island? Which one is most talked about as being a monopoly? Rayco. Okay, if you don't want to pay Rayco's prices, what are you going to do? Not have lights. Okay, so you got one or the other choice for that type of electricity, right? Okay, number 2. There must be no close substitutes. There must be no close substitutes for the firm's product. Okay, so let's talk about Rayco. What would be the only close substitute for Rayco? Solar energy. But is that really a close substitute? I would say no, because it has not produced a real market yet for solar energy being a reliable and cost affordable alternative to normal electricity. Okay? Right, Paula? It's not reliable if it's not done correctly. And so there's not enough stability yet in that market. And look at number 3. Entry into the market must be blocked. Okay? This is where Rayco, I can't tell you whether or not it's a strict monopoly. Entry into the market must be blocked means this. According to the government, you are not allowed to create competition with this company. Okay, so if the Honduran government said that Roatan is not allowed to have 2 electric companies, then it would be a straight up monopoly. Okay, but if we don't have another electric company just because no one else has tried to build another electric company here, even though they're allowed to, then it's just lacking competition. It's not a strict monopoly. Okay, so entry into the market must be blocked, meaning there's not allowed to create a competition with that company. So that would be like a lot of communistic countries would have monopolies like that. Okay, and sometimes governments do create, and we're about to see it, governments do create monopolies on purpose. Monopoly. Well, we've already talked about it, but let's formally write them down. The dangers are, without competition, a company can charge the highest possible price that buyers will pay. Okay? I mean, obviously they can pay, they can put the highest price that they want on there, but you don't want to make the buyers so mad that they're going to either leave the country or, do something else to contradict the crazy prices that these monopolies are giving. But number 2, a monopolistic producer can set high prices, lower the quality of its product, and still sell its good because customers cannot buy from anyone else. Okay, that's the hugest danger. And number 3, they get huge profits at the consumer's expense, just like the game. They get huge profits, the consumers become very, very, very poor. Okay, now we're going to talk about when government involvement is good and when government involvement is not so good, right? We have other notes about monopolies. Number 1, governments that own or control the nation's productive and distributive resources are famous for inefficient and bad monopolies. Okay, think about Venezuela, right? Think about how they took over the power company there, right? Ooh, horrible, absolutely horrible what happened there with the article that we read last year. Hasta que, 1, the prices, 2, the fact that people die because they have all those blackouts, and and people that are in the hospitals die before the generators come on, right? So they're famous for inefficient and bad monopolies, but some monopolies are necessary to have efficient production and services, okay? Let's look at one type of monopoly. It's called a legal monopoly. Legal monopolies are monopolies that governments allow in certain areas in order to encourage production. Okay, now this is interesting because I never even thought about these as monopolies, but it's true. Sometimes the governments create monopolies by allowing these things in the parentheses: patents, trademarks, and copyrights. What does that mean? Okay, that could be an author, that can be an inventor, that can be a scientist that creates a product or an idea that is unique, right? A certain invention, a certain piece of technology, a certain concept that they write about in books, a certain genre that they created that people like, but especially inventions, right? Well, let's say that you invent something and anybody else can copy you. You're making a lot of money for, like, let's say 6 months. You're making a lot of money on whatever invention you have created, okay? But then people start to figure out how to copy your invention. Great. What are they going to do? They're going to copy it. Then what's going to happen to your profits? They're going to go way down. Because what if these people figure out how to copy it and charge less money than you do? Okay, then what happens? You don't want to create it anymore. You lose your motivation, your ganas, to be in this market. And then all of a sudden you pull out. And then people lose their choices, right? So what the governments do instead is give you patents or copyrights or trademarks and say, okay, if your item, if your concept that you created or your invention that you created is so unique and you are gaining money on it because of its uniqueness, then they can grant you, obviously you have to pay for it, they can grant you a block, basically. That's what patents and trademarks and copyrights are. That no one else can take your item from you. And no one can copy you. And so no one can be that good of a competition against you. They can try to make things that are similar to you, but they probably aren't going to win if your trademark is that good. Okay, let's take, for instance, Apple. Basically, no one's ever going to take over Apple's uniqueness. We know that the Android market has plenty of marcas that you can go with. I don't know how to say that H1, wait, I don't know how to say it, honestly. But Samsung, different ones like that, but those are basically the two biggest ones. They'll always be the Android market, and then Apple will always be the only iPhone market, okay? Because Apple has a huge amount of patents and trademarks and copyrights. And so even if a company wanted to be competition with those companies, not the Android, but wanted to just create a whole new phone that was trying to compete with the iPhone system, they can't. Because they have patents on their operating system, they have patents on the things that make their company unique. Okay, that's a legal monopoly. It's not a monopoly that hurts us because you can either go into the iPhone market or you can go into the Android market, okay? But no one's going to touch them, basically ever, okay? Because of their patents and their trademarks. Until somebody else invents something completely new. But not anything like theirs because they can't. They're not allowed, okay? Think about Disney World. Disney World has a very distinct artistry about it, right? Everybody knows Minnie Mouse, everybody knows Mickey Mouse. Everybody tries to copy it, but you can't literally take the Disney symbols and sell them as your own. You can't make different Disney products that look exactly like the Disney products and sell them as your own. You might sell a few, but then Disney's gonna find you, okay? Because I actually have a friend that's an artist who, I mean, I don't think she was trying to break copyright rules, but she was making some products that you know, had Disney characters and Star Wars characters and different stuff like that. And Disney found her and told her to stop doing that, or they were going to have to sue her for doing that. So, you have to be careful because you can't break the copyright rules. You can get a big multa for it, which is a fine in English. And the company will get their money because that's why they paid big money to get those permissions. So that is a legal monopoly, which is a good thing, you guys, because think about it. If every idea that you made could be copied and stolen from you, then who is going to spend money on inventing ideas? They're going to wait till somebody else invents the ideas and then steal it. Okay? So that's where government regulation is good. Government regulation is very good in that sense, that no one can take your ideas. They can make competition against it, but they can't just steal your exact idea. Okay, let's look at another one. A firm can fill the demand for a good more efficiently than if there were multiple firms in the industry. Okay, and this is where actually the electric company comes in. What I think, though, is that the government here doesn't handle it correctly. I think that Rayco is allowed us to raise their prices way too high, and I don't think that the government has regulated it well. Because look what happens if the government actually regulates it well. It says a large, efficient utility that has a natural monopoly. Utilities, remember, that's your lights or your water or different stuff like that, is often available to provide goods at a lower price per unit than if several small, less efficient companies divided the market among them. Okay, so look, if you have a company like Rayco, and the government comes in and says, look, it's actually better, we'll protect you as a light company that no one else can come in here, because it's actually better that you're providing lights for everybody, because since you're so large, you can efficiently provide the electricity for everyone that needs it on the island, and do it at a lower rate than what if there were like 2 or 3 small companies who don't have the efficiency and don't really have the incentive to create efficiency because they're only serving a small area, and then their prices are going to be very, very high, right? So the government can say actually it's more beneficial that we only have one. But then they're going to put a ceiling on the price. They're going to say you can only charge this much and you're not allowed to go over that, so that it's not hurting the consumer that the government just created a monopoly. Okay, so that's why I think it's actually the government that hasn't stepped in well enough to create that law to give us a monopoly with Rayco, but then to have expectations and standards for it. Okay, but everyone can have their own opinion about that, obviously. But we're going to regulate it. But then there's a lot of negative qualities to monopolies that are not natural or legal. That's the less quality, higher prices, and no choices, right? So, thankfully, when we live in a free market economy, there are less monopolies. And if there is a monopoly, sometimes you can move away from it or find solutions for it, okay? So here you go. There's some 3 thinking questions. All I need to see for your homework today is that you took notes and that you answered these 3 thinking questions. I'm going to read them to you to give you time to look at them, but you can always take a screenshot. It says, number 1, some natural monopolies exist, such as electric companies. If one of those monopolies were to suddenly double its prices, what would citizens do to fight against it? Okay, the only hint I can give you is that there's not a lot of choices to fight against it, but go ahead and think of some solutions because you guys are really good at thinking of solutions. Number 2, the federal government holds a monopoly on certain services, and this is very true, like war, okay? They're the only ones that can wage war, they're the only ones that can collect taxes, they're the only ones that can regulate imports, and they're the only ones that can admit immigrants. So those are monopolistic services that the government has a monopoly over, right? And it's not going to change. What are the advantages and disadvantages? So what I want you to think about. What are the advantages and disadvantages that the federal government is in charge of these services? What is your opinion? Should private businesses take over these areas? Okay, and why? Number 3, explain how governments create or encourage monopolies by granting people patents, trademarks, and copyrights. We actually talked about that a lot, so go back and listen if you didn't understand, or ask me any questions. There you go.